From my desk on the 42nd floor, Manhattan is a perfect grid of light and logic, a city built on numbers, on transactions, on predictable outcomes. It's the world I understand. It's the world I control. For 17 years, my marriage to Clara was a part of that grid, a cornerstone. But lately, a crack has appeared in the foundation, a fracture so fine you wouldn't see it unless you were looking for it. I'm always looking. It started with the small things, the data points that didn't compute. Her phone, once left carelessly on the kitchen counter, now rests screen down, a silent black mirror. The late nights at her marketing agency, once peppered with texts about demanding clients, are now just silent. There's a new distance in her eyes, an emotional latency in her responses that my analytical mind can't help but flag as a critical error. Her 39th birthday was the tipping point. I spent months tracking down a first edition of Anne Sexton's poems, the one she'd mentioned wanting in passing years ago. I thought the gesture, the memory, would mean something. She unwrapped it, smiled a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and said, "Oh, Ethan, you shouldn't have." The book now sits on her nightstand, unopened, a monument to my failed calculation. This evening, looking for an aspirin in her purse, my fingers brushed against a slip of paper. It wasn't a receipt, it was a movie ticket stub. The Parisian Enigma, a French indie film. Matinee showing, 3:15 p.m. last Tuesday. My blood went cold. Last Tuesday, she had an urgent all-hands-on-deck meeting with the new client from Zurich. That's what she told me. A small, stupid, utterly pointless lie. Why not just say you went to a movie? The question echoes in the silent apartment, a place that suddenly feels too big, too empty. The lie is what sticks with me. It's not about the movie. It's about the ease of the deception. It suggests practice. It suggests there are other lies, bigger ones, hiding in plain sight, and I've been too arrogant to see them. I stand by the floor-to-ceiling window, the city lights blurring into a meaningless smear below. The man who can predict the movement of global markets with terrifying accuracy was blind to the truth in his own home. The rage is a cold, clean thing. It's not the hot, messy anger of a lover scorned. It's the fury of an architect who has just discovered that his masterpiece was built on sand. The uncertainty is a cancer. I can't live with it. I can't function in a world of maybes and what-ifs. I need facts. I need concrete proof, one way or the other. I've spent my life mitigating risk, and this is the biggest risk of all. Standing here, watching the ceaseless flow of traffic on Park Avenue, I make a decision. My grief is hardening into resolve. I won't confront her, not yet. A confrontation yields emotion, denial, more lies. I don't want a confession. I want leverage. I want the unvarnished, brutal truth, and I'm willing to pay any price to get it. The city glitters below, indifferent. It doesn't know it, but tonight a predator just woke up inside me, and my first hunt is about to begin. My corporate lawyer, Arthur Vance, didn't ask questions. When I called him at 7 in the morning and asked for the best private investigator in New York, he simply said, "Marcus Thorne, ex-NYPD, now a specialist in high-net-worth domestic cases. As discreet as the grave, and just as final." He texted me the address an hour later. The finality of it appealed to me. I wanted an ending to this crippling uncertainty. Thorne's office was in a sleek, anonymous tower in Midtown, the kind of place that prided itself on its invisibility. The interior was all dark mahogany, worn leather, and the low hum of filtered air. It smelled of money and freshly brewed coffee. There was no secretary, just a heavy oak door that opened into a spacious room. Marcus Thorne sat behind a vast empty desk, a fortress of calm in the storm of my life. He was a man built of solid lines, with a quiet confidence that filled the space around him. He gestured to the chair opposite him. "Mr. Davies," Arthur called ahead. He didn't offer a handshake. He just watched me with eyes that had seen everything. I laid it out for him, not as a husband, but as a client stating a problem. I spoke of data points, behavioral shifts, inconsistencies in schedules. I tried to strip the emotion from it, to present it as a puzzle to be solved. My voice was steady, a carefully constructed facade. Thorne listened without interruption, his gaze never wavering. When I finished, the silence stretched, thick and heavy. He finally leaned forward, his voice a low, reassuring baritone. "The not knowing is the worst part. It eats you alive." He understood. He wasn't just hearing the facts. He was hearing the subtext, the gnawing paranoia that had driven me to his door. In that moment, I felt a wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled me. I slid a manila envelope across the polished desk. Inside was a recent photograph of Clara, her work address, her gym schedule, the license plate of her car. Every detail I could think of. It felt like a profound betrayal, handing over the intimate map of her life to a stranger. It was a necessary one. Thorne didn't open the envelope. He simply placed a hand on it, as if taking possession of the problem itself. "The process is simple, Ethan," he said, using my first name for the first time. It created an illusion of intimacy, of alliance. "I observe, I document, I report. You will receive irrefutable facts, nothing more, nothing less. From there, what you do is your decision." He finally extended a hand across the desk. His grip was firm, dry, a contract sealed. I was outsourcing my own surveillance, hiring a professional to be my eyes and ears. Walking out of that building and back into the harsh light of the city, I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I had just surgically removed a tumor. I had delegated the chaos. I had converted my messy, human problem into a professional service with a clear deliverable. Clarity. But as I hailed a cab, a cold thought slipped through my relief. What if the clarity he delivered was something I couldn't survive? The week that followed was a master class in controlled insanity. On the surface, I was the same Ethan. I went to the office, I ran my models, I moved millions of dollars with a few keystrokes. At home, I made small talk with Clara about her day, asked about her projects, feigned interest. But beneath the calm facade, my mind was a screaming chaos of algorithms, all running the same single, torturous variable. What was Thorne finding? Every ring of my phone sent a jolt of ice water through my veins. I lived in a state of hyper-awareness. I analyzed the cadence of her laughter, the exact length of her pauses before answering a simple question. Our apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a stage. Every conversation was a performance, and I was convinced I was the only one in the room who didn't have the script. She was a ghost in my house, and I was becoming a ghost in my own life, haunting the periphery of a truth I couldn't see. The call came on a Tuesday morning. I was in a sterile conference room about to close a deal when my personal phone vibrated. A blocked number. I excused myself, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Yes?" My voice was tight. "Ethan, it's Thorne." His tone was flat, devoid of emotion. Just a transmission of data. "I have something. She's been meeting someone, consistently." My knuckles were white where I gripped the phone. I leaned against the cool glass of the window, the city a dizzying blur below. "Who is he?" The words were barely a whisper. "His name is Julian Vance. He's the new creative director at her agency." Thorne paused, and I could hear the faint click of a keyboard. So far, it's all been during the day. Coffee shops in Soho, a bench in Central Park. Nothing overtly compromising Ethan. It could be work. But I knew it wasn't. The name hit me like a physical blow. Julian Vance. It wasn't a faceless shadow anymore. It had a name. It had a job. It was real. "Send me the report," I said, my voice cold and hard. I hung up before he could reply. Back in the conference room, I smiled, shook hands, and closed the 8-figure deal. No one noticed the tremor in my hand. No one saw the abyss that had just opened up inside me. That night, after Clara was asleep, I locked myself in my office and typed the name into Google. Julian Vance. His face appeared on the screen in seconds, pulled from his agency's website. He was younger than me, of course. He had that studied, artistic dishevelment, the expensive haircut that looked messy on purpose, the designer glasses, the hint of a smirk. He was my antithesis. I was structured finance. He was unstructured creativity. I was a man of concrete numbers. He was a man of abstract ideas. Paranoia is a virus. It rewrites your code. Suddenly, every late night was a lie. Every client dinner was a cover story. Every time she laughed at a text message, I saw his face. I pictured him touching her arm, her laughing at some clever bohemian joke that I would never understand. The report from Thorne was clinical, just dates and times. But in my mind, I filled in the blanks with vivid, torturous detail. Thorne had said nothing was compromising. But he was wrong. The betrayal wasn't in a kiss or an embrace. It was in the shared coffee, the stolen hours, the simple, devastating fact that she was building a world that didn't include me. And I knew, with the certainty of a market crash, that the real evidence, the proof that would justify the rage coiling in my gut, was coming. The only question was what I would do when it arrived. The second call came 10 days later. This time, the summons was direct and devoid of any professional courtesy. "Ethan, you should come in." There was a new gravity in Thorne's voice, a tone that signaled a conclusion. I knew, with sickening certainty, that this was it. The waiting was over. The verdict was in. The drive to his office was an out-of-body experience. The city's familiar symphony of horns and sirens felt distant, muted, as if I were hearing it from underwater. I walked into his office, and the scent of expensive coffee and leather now seemed cloying, suffocating. Thorne was standing by the window, but he turned as I entered. He didn't offer a seat. On the center of his vast, polished desk lay a single, thick manila envelope. It looked obscene in its ordinariness, a simple paper container holding the wreckage of my life. My eyes were locked on it. It was the only thing in the room that mattered. "I think this is what you were looking for," Thorne said. There was a flicker of something in his eyes. Pity, maybe. Professional sympathy. It made my skin crawl. He gestured toward the envelope. My hands felt like lead. My heart was a cold, heavy stone in my chest. I didn't want to open it. I had to. I ripped the clasp and slid out a stack of 5x7 glossy photographs. The paper was cool and smooth beneath my trembling fingertips. They were shot with a long lens, slightly grainy, capturing a stolen moment in Central Park. The first one showed Clara and Julian Vance on a secluded bench. They were laughing. I hadn't seen her laugh like that, a genuine, unburdened laugh, in years. It was a physical punch to the gut. My breath hitched. I forced myself to look at the next one. His hand was covering hers where it rested on the bench. A simple, proprietary gesture. Then I saw it. The final photograph, the kill shot. He was leaning in close, his expression tender. His thumb was on her cheek, gently brushing something away, a stray eyelash, a tear, it didn't matter. It was the intimacy of the act that shattered me. It was a gesture of 1,000 shared moments, of a comfortable, easy love. There were no kisses, no desperate embraces. There was only this quiet, devastating tenderness. And it was enough. It was more than enough. Something inside me didn't just break, it vaporized. The white-hot pain was there for a split second, and then it was gone, replaced by a profound, chilling calm. The grief had been cauterized, leaving behind something clean and hard and sharp. A new purpose. I methodically placed the photographs back in the envelope, my hands perfectly steady now. I looked up at Thorne, my face a blank mask. I heard a voice that sounded like mine, but flatter, emptier. "How much do I owe you?" Thorne looked taken aback for a second, his professional composure momentarily rattled by the iciness in my tone. I had already moved on. The evidence was secured. The emotional response was an inefficiency I could no longer afford. My mind was already calculating variables, running scenarios, formulating a new strategy. I walked out of his office with the envelope in my hand, not as a victim, but as an architect. He thought he had delivered proof of an affair. What he had really given me was a target. The first thing I did was pay Marcus Thorne's final invoice. The wire transfer was a clean, surgical transaction, a 7-figure sum for a handful of photographs. I categorized the expense in my private ledger as asset acquisition, because that's what the truth was now, not a source of pain, but an asset. Information is the most valuable commodity in my world, and Thorne had delivered a portfolio of pure, actionable intelligence. My new objective crystallized in the cold silence of my office. Divorce was a negotiation, a messy, emotional process of dividing assets and admitting defeat. Scandal was a headline, a temporary embarrassment. Both were insufficient. Both were designed for broken hearts. My heart wasn't broken. It had been replaced by a calculator. I didn't want to end my marriage. I wanted to win. And winning meant he had to lose. Everything. Julian Vance was no longer a person. He was a target. A liability on my life's balance sheet that needed to be zeroed out. Clara slept down the hall, oblivious. The soft sound of her breathing was a faint, mocking rhythm in the quiet of our apartment. She thought she was sleeping next to her husband. She was wrong. That man was gone, replaced by something colder, more patient. I poured a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid catching the glow of my 6 monitors. My real work was just beginning. The hunt for Julian Vance wasn't going to be conducted in the physical world of parks and coffee shops. It would happen here, in the silent digital world where I was king. Using the access my position affords me, the deep, dark wells of data that underpin the global economy, I began to dissect his life. I wasn't looking for secrets. I was looking for vulnerabilities. I peeled back the layers of his existence one by one. Credit reports, student loan applications, mortgage statements, car payments. It was all there, a digital ghost telling me everything I needed to know. He lived just beyond his means, a man buoyed by the promise of future success. He leased a BMW he couldn't afford, and carried a credit card balance that would make a banker weep. For 3 consecutive nights, I slept for only 2 hours at a time, fueled by coffee and a singular burning focus. I sifted through his digital footprint, his social media, his online purchases. But the real prize, the key, would be financial. It always is. I paid a contact in the Cayman Islands a hefty sum for a glimpse into his brokerage accounts. And then, at 3:17 in the morning on the 3rd night, I found it. The Rosetta Stone of his ruin. It was so beautifully, poetically stupid. Almost all his liquid assets, every penny of his savings, and a significant portion of a recent inheritance were tied up in a single stock. A small, speculative tech startup called Biogen Innovations. The company was on the cusp of a major FDA announcement, and the market chatter was ecstatic. The stock was poised to explode. He had bet his entire financial future on one roll of the dice. He had exposed his queen. I leaned back in my leather chair, a slow, predatory smile spreading across my face for the first time in weeks. I stared at the stock ticker on the screen, the blinking green numbers representing his hopes, his dreams, the future he was planning with my wife. What a glorious, arrogant fool. He had built his entire world on a foundation of shifting sand. He had no idea I was the coming storm. My plan wasn't a blunt instrument. It was a scalpel. A complex, multi-layered financial strategy designed not just to bankrupt Julian Vance, but to dismantle his reality from the inside out, using the very system he trusted to build his future. Revenge, for me, was not an act of passion. It was a hostile takeover of a man's life. The beauty of the market is that it runs on two things: greed and fear. I was about to inject a lethal dose of the latter. First, I created the narrative. A lie, but a sophisticated one, wrapped in layers of plausible data. I spent a night building 3 separate digital ghosts, anonymous but credible-sounding personas on niche, high-level financial forums. One was a disgruntled lab technician, another a mid-level executive, the third a cynical biotech analyst. Each had a meticulously crafted history of posts, digital breadcrumbs leading back months, establishing their legitimacy in these small, influential communities. Then, through these conduits, I began to leak the poison. It started with a whisper. My lab tech ghost dropped a cryptic comment about contamination issues in Biogen's primary research facility. Hours later, my analyst persona posted a long, detailed thread questioning the company's aggressive timeline, citing anonymous sources about a significant setback in their Phase 3 trials. The lie was precise, technical, and terrifyingly believable to anyone in the know. The next morning, I made 2 calls. The first was to a gossip-hungry financial blogger I occasionally fed information to, using a burner phone and a voice modulator. The second was a carefully worded, anonymous tip to a junior reporter at a major financial news outlet, a kid I knew was desperate to make a name for himself. I didn't give them the story. I just pointed them to the forum threads my ghosts had created. I didn't need to convince them. I just needed to plant the seed. Panic would do the rest. The final move was the most critical. It was the declaration of war. Through a series of offshore accounts and shell corporations, a financial labyrinth I had built years ago for just such a contingency, I began to buy put options on Biogen. Tens of thousands of them. Then I took the biggest risk. I opened a massive short position against the stock. I wasn't just predicting the crash. I was betting my own fortune on it. I was putting my money where my malice was. I sat back in my chair, the trap now fully set. The screen in front of me glowed with the pre-market trading data for Biogen Innovations. It was still holding steady, a patient on a life support machine, unaware that the doctor in the next room was about to pull the plug. The world saw a stock ticker. I saw a man's digital heartbeat, and my finger was on the button that would stop it. This wasn't just about Clara anymore. This was about restoring order to the universe. It was about proving that a man of logic and structure could decimate a man of fleeting passions and reckless ambition. He had built a house of cards on my territory. I was about to demonstrate what a controlled demolition looked like. I had just placed a bet worth millions on a man's complete and utter destruction, and I was the one rigging the game. The collapse was a thing of brutal, mathematical beauty. It began not as a crash, but as a tremor. The opening bell rang, and Biogen stock dipped a single nervous percentage point. Then the blog post I had seeded went live, and the tremor became a fracture. By mid-morning, when the official newswire picked up the story under the headline, "Biogen plagued by rumors of trial setback," the fracture became a full-blown earthquake. The sell-off began. I watched it all from the silent sanctuary of my home office, a god observing his creation from on high. My screens were a waterfall of cascading red numbers. The panic was palpable, a living entity feeding on itself. The algorithms that govern the market are designed to react to fear, and I had given them the purest dose imaginable. By the end of the first day, the stock was down 43%. Julian Vance's net worth had been cleaved in half. It was a good start. The second day was a slaughter. The company issued a frantic, vague press release denying the rumors, but it was too late. Their denial was worded with just enough corporate doublespeak to sound like a confirmation of the worst fears. The avalanche I had started was now self-sustaining. It no longer needed my help. By the time the closing bell rang, Biogen Innovations was trading at a 72% loss from its opening price 48 hours prior. Wiped out. A ghost of a company. I closed my trading positions, the profits transferring silently into my offshore accounts. The financial news sites were already posting the postmortems. I found the article I was looking for on a popular finance blog. The Biogen Bloodbath: How Unverified Rumors Cost Investors Millions. It mentioned several high-volume traders who had been ruined. And there it was in the 5th paragraph, a single, beautiful sentence. Sources confirm creative director Julian Vance, a major private shareholder, has been financially devastated. That evening, Clara came home looking pale and drawn. She dropped her keys on the hall table with a clatter and let out a long, weary sigh. She came into my office, where I was pretending to read a market report. "The most awful day," she said, her voice thin. She looked at me, her eyes wide with what looked like genuine shock and distress. "They fired Julian Vance. He had some kind of breakdown this morning. Apparently, he's had huge financial problems. He lost everything." She stood there, a portrait of sympathy, her gaze searching mine for a shared sense of dismay. And for a single, fleeting second, I felt a stab of something unfamiliar, a ghost of guilt. I saw the human cost reflected in her honest eyes. But then I looked at her, at this woman who was mourning the ruin of another man, and the feeling was instantly crushed, replaced by a wave of cold, righteous power. He deserved it. They both did. "That's terrible," I said, my voice a perfect instrument of calm concern. Inside, a dark, heavy satisfaction settled in my gut. The equation was balanced. The variable had been eliminated. The architect had demolished the flaw in his design. I had taken everything from the man who had tried to take what was mine. I had won. So why, as I watched my wife stare blankly at the city lights, did it feel like I was the only one in the room celebrating? The target was neutralized. The threat was eliminated. By all metrics, the operation was a resounding success. I had executed a flawless strategy, and the desired outcome had been achieved. Julian Vance was a ghost, a footnote in a financial blog post. Yet, as the days bled into weeks, the victory I had engineered began to taste like ash in my mouth. The dark, exhilarating satisfaction had evaporated, leaving behind a cold, hollow space. I had assumed that by removing the variable, the equation would solve itself. I thought that with Vance gone, the crack in my perfect life would seal over, leaving nothing but a faint hairline scar. I was wrong. The crack did not heal. It widened into a chasm. Clara and I were two strangers coexisting in the same expensive, sterile space, the silence between us now heavier and more profound than ever before. She moved through our home with a kind of weary grace, her presence both intimate and infinitely distant. The fake smiles were gone, replaced by a quiet, impenetrable sadness that clung to her like a shroud. I had destroyed a man I didn't know, a man I had only seen in grainy photographs, and the victory had changed nothing. It hadn't brought her back to me. It had only pushed her further away, into a place I couldn't reach, a place I couldn't even see. The emptiness became a living thing in the apartment, a third resident at our silent dinner table. I had won. I had utterly and completely won. But my prize was this: a wife who looked through me, a home that felt like a mausoleum, and the gnawing, bitter realization that my precise, calculated revenge had been a pointless, futile gesture. I had performed a brilliant surgery, only to discover the patient had already been dead. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. The silence was a physical pressure, crushing the air from my lungs. I found her standing by the living room window, staring down at the indifferent city lights, a single glass of wine untouched in her hand. I stood behind her, the architect of her lover's ruin, and for the first time, I abandoned strategy. I asked a simple, human question, the one thing my models couldn't predict. "Are you happy, Clara?" The question hung in the air between us, fragile and terrifying. She didn't turn around. For a long moment I thought she wouldn't answer. Then her voice, so quiet it was almost carried away by the hum of the city, delivered a verdict far more devastating than any photograph. "I don't know, Ethan," she whispered to the glass. "I haven't known for a long time." And in that moment I understood. I hadn't destroyed her lover. I had only destroyed a symptom of a disease I didn't even understand. Months drifted by in a haze of quiet, suffocating order. My life was a pristine spreadsheet once more, the messy variable of Julian Vance deleted from the equation. But deleting a cell doesn't erase the fact that it was once there. The emptiness he left behind wasn't filled by a return to the old order. It was a void, a black hole that warped everything around it. I found myself in my office more and more, seeking refuge in the clean, cold logic of my work. It was the only place where cause still led to effect. I was performing a routine financial audit of my personal accounts, a task I usually find meditative. It's a process of confirming truths, of balancing the books. My eyes scanned the digital statement, the lines of debits and credits a familiar language. Then I saw it. A single transaction from 3 months ago. A 7-figure wire transfer to a corporate entity named Thorne Investigations, LLC. The name stared back at me from the screen, a digital scar. An impulse I didn't try to control made me open the bottom drawer of my desk. The manila envelope was still there, tucked in the back. I hadn't touched it, hadn't even looked at it, since the day I'd walked out of Thorne's office. It felt heavy, not with the weight of paper, but with the density of its consequence. I slid it out, the rough paper cool against my skin. My hands were perfectly steady as I pulled out the glossy photographs. I sifted through them until I found the one that had served as the final nail in the coffin. The kill shot. Julian Vance, leaning in, his thumb gently brushing Clara's cheek. The intimacy that had fueled a hurricane of calculated rage. I stared at his face, the face of a man I had utterly destroyed, and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no remorse, just a profound, hollow echo. I turned the photograph over in my hand, my thumb tracing the edge. That's when I saw it. On the back, in the bottom right corner, was a small, professional-looking stamp from Thorne's agency. It was machine-printed, precise. It recorded the date and time the photograph was taken. My analyst's brain, the part of me that never sleeps, processed the information instantly, without emotion. May 7th, 4:15 in the afternoon. The date rang a faint bell, a distant, dissonant chord in the symphony of my memory. I closed my eyes, accessing the internal calendar that never fails me. May 7th. It was a Tuesday. I searched the file. My schedule for that day was blocked out from 3 p.m. onwards, the annual fundraising gala for the hospital, hosted by my firm's CEO, a mandatory command performance. I remember it with excruciating clarity because I had spilled a drop of red wine on the white tablecloth and spent the rest of the evening obsessing over the stain. And Clara, she was there. She was with me. I have a photographic memory for details, for data points. She wore an emerald green dress that I'd always loved. I remember complaining to her about the keynote speaker right as we were getting our coats from the check-in. The clock on the wall above the attendant's head read 4:20 p.m. We had been there, together, for over an hour. It was an immutable fact, a fixed point in my timeline. My eyes snapped open. I stared at the timestamp on the back of the photo, then at the image on the front. Dataset A, Clara was with me at the Waldorf Astoria at 4:15 p.m. Dataset B, this photograph shows Clara in Central Park with Julian Vance at 4:15 p.m. My mind, the perfect, logical machine, slammed into a wall. Both could not be true. Therefore, one of them had to be a lie. My entire revenge, my cold and righteous war, was built on the foundation of this single, intimate moment. And this moment never happened. The photograph felt like a burning coal in my hand. For the first time in months, I sought Clara out. I found her in the bedroom, reading a book, the soft glow of the lamp illuminating the sad, quiet stranger my wife had become. I didn't speak. I simply walked over and placed the photograph on the open page in front of her. My heart was a silent, pulsing drum in the stillness of the room. This was not an accusation. This was a request for a data point to solve an impossible equation. She looked down at the image of herself and Julian Vance, a faint line of confusion creasing her brow. Then her eyes flickered to the corner, registering the date. Her entire posture changed. The confusion dissolved into pure, unadulterated shock. Her head snapped up, her eyes locking with mine. "But," she stammered, her voice a thin, reedy whisper, "that's not possible. That was the night of the hospital gala. I was with you, all evening." I watched her, my senses on high alert, analyzing every micro-expression, every shift in her breathing. There was no flicker of deception, no hint of a lie. What I saw in her eyes was the same vertiginous disbelief that was echoing in my own soul. She was as much a victim of this impossibility as I was. And then, the dam of her carefully constructed composure finally broke. The months of silent grief and unspoken misery came pouring out. The confession that followed was not the one I had paid a fortune to acquire. There was no passionate affair, no torrid secret. There was only a quiet, desperate unhappiness. She admitted she had been miserable for years, suffocated by the perfect, sterile life I had built for us. She confessed to wanting a divorce, to seeking out a lawyer, to fantasizing about a different existence. She had met with the attorney a few times, trying to find the courage to leave. "But not Julian," she sobbed. the words racked with a pain that felt raw and genuine. I barely knew him, Ethan. He was just a nice man at the office. We got coffee twice. We talked about work. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face, a look of desperate, pleading honesty in her eyes. There was never anything between us. I swear to you. I swear. The sobs shook her entire body, the sound of a heart breaking not from guilt, but from a profound, soul-crushing weariness. My world didn't just turn upside down, it imploded. Every certainty, every action, every cold, calculated move I had made was based on a single, fundamental lie. I had waged a war on the wrong enemy. I had destroyed an innocent man's life based on a fiction. And if Clara wasn't lying, and I knew with a terrifying certainty that she wasn't, then someone else was. Someone had manufactured the evidence. Someone had built the bomb, knowing I would be the one to detonate it. The pieces began to click into place with the sickening, brutal logic of a bear trap snapping shut. I thought back to Marcus Thorne's office, his calm demeanor, his reassuring words. "You will receive irrefutable facts," he had said. Facts. He hadn't delivered facts. He had delivered a weapon, custom designed to fit my hand. I had been so blinded by my own rage and arrogance that I never questioned the data. I had been played. I was not the architect of a brilliant revenge. I was a pawn in someone else's much, much darker game. I left her there, surrounded by the wreckage of her confession, and walked back to my office. I closed the heavy oak door behind me, the soft click of the latch a sound of finality. The emotional phase was over. The tears and betrayals were just noise, corrupt data that had led me to a catastrophic miscalculation. Now, there was only the signal. My rage was no longer a hot, blinding fury. It was a cold, pure, clarifying light. I had been made a fool, and my entire world now centered on one single, galvanizing objective: finding the architect of that lie. My mind replayed every interaction with Marcus Thorne. His flawless facade, the expensive suit, the reassuring baritone, the air of unimpeachable professionalism. As discreet as the grave, my lawyer had said. He was right. He had buried the truth and sold me a beautifully crafted lie. He had studied me, understood my triggers, my arrogance, my need for control, and then built a weapon perfectly designed to exploit it. He didn't just give me a photograph. He gave me a loaded gun and pointed me at the wrong man. The hunt began. My 6 monitors bathed the room in a cold, blue light. Thorne thought he was invisible, a ghost who moved through the lives of the wealthy and disappeared. But I live in a world of digital ghosts. I hunt them for a living. His firm, Thorne Investigations, was a fortress of digital security, designed to protect the secrets of his powerful clientele. It took me the better part of the night to find a crack, a single-use login credential from a third-party catering vendor that had been carelessly left active. It was a whisper of a vulnerability, but it was all I needed. Once inside his server, I bypassed the client-facing files. I didn't care about his other cases. I was looking for the source of the capital, the money trail that would explain the why. In a deeply encrypted accounting subfolder, I found it. Not my payments, but others. 3 massive, anonymous wire transfers, made over the course of 2 months, totaling a sum that would make a hedge fund manager blush. This was never just a surveillance job. This was a long-term, high-value project. The transfers originated from a holding company in the Cayman Islands, a typical digital dead end. The name was Clearwater Holdings. It felt vaguely familiar, a faint echo in the back of my mind, but I couldn't place it. I spent another hour pulling on every string I had, calling in favors from contacts in Geneva and Hong Kong, using my own considerable leverage to peel back the layers of corporate anonymity. At 4 in the morning, I got the answer. My blood turned to ice in my veins. Clearwater Holdings was a shell, a legal fiction designed to manage the assets of a single, private entity, the Clara Bellows Trust. The trust fund her father had established for her when she was a child. The money had come from her. Clara had paid him. My wife had paid the man who had framed her for an affair. The logic of it was a screaming paradox. Why? Why would she pay him to destroy a man she barely knew and shatter a marriage she wanted to escape anyway? My mind was a whirlwind of impossibilities, trying to build a scenario that fit the data. And then a stray memory surfaced, a piece of dismissed information from that very first meeting. It was a flicker of a moment, nothing more. Thorne, standing in my apartment to finalize our agreement, his eyes briefly sweeping over my desk. He had glanced at the silver-framed photograph of Clara I kept there. And his look, it wasn't the detached appraisal of a professional. It was the hungry, possessive look of a man staring at something he wanted. Or, I realized with a sudden, sickening clarity, something he already had. The drive to Midtown was a study in absolute clarity. The chaotic symphony of the city, the blaring horns, the screaming sirens, the endless river of people, was all just white noise. The rage was gone, replaced by the serene, frictionless hum of a machine with a single purpose. I was no longer a husband or a victim or a fool. I was a consequence. I walked into his building without an appointment, the security guard barely glancing up as I passed. The elevator ride was silent, smooth. A final ascent before the fall. I didn't knock. I pushed the heavy oak door to his office open and stepped inside. He was on the phone, leaning back in his chair, laughing at something the person on the other end had said. He saw me, and his smile didn't falter, but his eyes hardened. He held up a single finger, a gesture of control, and finished his call with a smooth, unhurried, "I'll call you back." He hung up and gestured to the chair opposite him. "Ethan, to what do I owe the pleasure?" That same false, reassuring smile. That same infuriating calm. I didn't sit. I walked to his desk, the fortress of mahogany that had once seemed so imposing. "The game's over, Marcus." I slid the printout of the wire transfer from the Clara Bellows Trust across the polished wood. Next to it, I placed the photograph. The kill shot. The one that never happened. For the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine surprise crack his professional veneer. It was gone in a second, replaced by a slow, amused smile. He leaned back in his chair, a king on his throne, and actually chuckled. "You're even smarter than I gave you credit for," he said, his voice dripping with admiration. He didn't deny it, he reveled in it. "But you're still playing last week's game, Ethan. You're trying to checkmate a king who has already toppled your board." He stood up and walked to the window, his back to me, looking down at the city he believed he owned. He unspooled the entire story with the pride of an artist explaining his masterpiece. He had met Clara at a gallery opening 6 months ago. The attraction was instant. They began an affair. She wanted to leave me, but our prenuptial agreement was an iron cage. She was terrified of my reaction, of the financial and social ruin I could bring down on her. So they devised a plan. A perfect, elegant plan. "She knew you," he said, his voice filled with a lover's intimacy. "She knew your pride, your jealousy, your absolute faith in data. We didn't need to create a real affair. We just needed to give your paranoia a target." He turned from the window, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of his own genius. "We knew you wouldn't just divorce her. We knew you'd go after him. and we knew you'd use your skills to do it. Market manipulation. A federal crime. The plan was for you to get caught, to go to prison. She gets the compassionate divorce, the full fortune, and me. You were the architect of your own destruction. I just handed you the blueprints." He stood there, silhouetted against the skyline, the very picture of absolute victory. "You destroyed the wrong man, Ethan," he said, the final, condescending twist of the knife. "And now you're trapped. You can't go to the police with any of this without admitting to a crime that will send you away for a decade. You can't touch me. You can't touch her. It's over." He was right. The logic was flawless. The trap was perfect. But he, the master of observation, had missed one small detail. He hadn't noticed the small, almost invisible red light on the digital recorder in my breast pocket. He hadn't noticed that it had been on since the moment I walked through his door. 6 months later. I'm looking at the same Manhattan skyline, but the perspective has changed. I'm no longer on the 42nd floor, a king surveying his kingdom. I'm on the 7th floor of a small, rented apartment in a neighborhood without a name. The grid of light is the same, but it no longer looks like a map of my own making. It just looks like a city. I've lost nearly everything. The penthouse, the portfolio, the 17-year marriage, all of it gone. Liquidated. The day after I walked out of Marcus Thorne's office, I took the digital recording of his confession and packaged it. I sent one copy to the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division and another to the Securities and Exchange Commission. Attached to both was my own sworn affidavit, a calm, clinical, multi-page confession detailing every step of my market manipulation scheme, from the creation of the digital ghosts to the precise timing of the short sale. I confessed to it all. I gave them a perfect prosecutable case against myself. Marcus and Clara were arrested 2 weeks later. Their faces, stripped of their usual confident beauty, were all over the news for a day. Conspiracy to commit fraud, among other charges. They're out on bail now, their high-priced lawyers preparing for a long, ugly trial they will almost certainly lose. My own trial is pending. My cooperation will likely earn me a reduced sentence, but there will be a sentence. Prison is a statistical certainty. A data point in my future I can no longer control. There was one final transaction I had to make. Before the government froze my assets, I made an anonymous wire transfer. I tracked down Julian Vance, who was apparently working a freelance graphic design job in Portland, and returned every dollar he had lost, with interest calculated to the highest possible legal rate. It wasn't an apology. An apology would have been a useless, emotional gesture. It was a correction, a balancing of the ledger. It was the only clean, logical move left to make in a world of chaos I had helped create. I lost. By every metric I used to measure my life, I have been utterly defeated. The architect is buried in the ruins of his own design. But sometimes, when I stand at this new, lower window and look at my own faint reflection in the glass, I see something I haven't seen in years. I don't see the cuckolded husband. I don't see the vengeful monster who destroyed a man on the basis of a lie. I see a man stripped of everything but the truth. And in the profound, terrifying quiet of this new life, I've come to understand that this clarity, this brutal, bankrupting clarity, is worth more than all the money in the world.